I would like to introduce you to your speakers today. They're going to talk about a practical attack against VDI solutions. So please give a warm welcome to Daniel Brody and Michael Sholoff.
Okay, guys, thank you very much for having us this morning. I'm sure that, like second day, it's always a rough morning for people here. So today we are going to talk about practical attacks, so essentially how a virtual desktop infrastructure or VDI solution can be compromised on mobile devices. So essentially it's both, I would say, like an enterprise-centric and a mobile-centric talk. And let's, before we start, let me give you some quick overview about us. Daniel, probably you start introducing yourself.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I've been around 10 years in the security field. I started off with PC, moved to mobile recently, about 3 years ago when I joined Lacoon, where I've been doing a lot of vulnerability assessment, researching iOS and Android vulnerabilities, and security in general. And also we've been doing leading the whole developing of using virtual execution to analyze mobile malware, MRATs, and stuff like that. And last year we gave you a talk about similar to what we're doing here, but just about MDMs.
Thanks. So my name is Michael. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Lacoon Mobile Security. Before co-founding Lacoon, I was involved in mobile security research for over a decade. So initially in the government space, government defense space. And around 2011, we basically took most of the knowledge and basically founded Lacoon, where we, as Daniel mentioned, we basically develop a solution and provide a solution for taking care of the different and more advanced threats for mobile devices, both for iOS and Android. Clearly, one of the interesting things that I have the opportunity to do as a CEO is sort of like to tie the security research with the actual business-oriented things that I see in the ecosystem. So with the interaction with the business owners, I do see some of the really interesting and emerging trends, and basically I'm able to sort of navigate the research and product roadmap of our company. So this is probably something that you will see during this presentation. So let me sort of give you a quick agenda about what we are going to talk today. Clearly, the first thing that we want to do is to give quite a quick overview about mobile VDI, basically why and how VDI solutions are being used for mobile devices. And then we sort of will go through a series of exercises about how those attacks are being conducted in the wild. And we will show you demos, live demos of several of those attacks, essentially how mobile remote access trojans, which is essentially off-the-shelf malware, are able to attack those solutions using keyloggers, credential theft, and screen scrapping, and also a very interesting attack, especially on the iOS devices, which is called a malicious configuration profile, a sort of man-in-the-middle attack, how that can compromise VDI solution. So I think, probably we will be able to do 2 demos out of those 4. The other 2 will show you a quick screenshots of how that is being conducted. And we sort of summarize about what we believe is the right infrastructure, how you can actually augment the architecture and basically provide a defense in depth around VDI solutions on mobile. So this is sort of a lesson that we learned for the last year talk. So we do need to give you a quick disclaimer about what this session is not about. And the first thing is that we are not going to don't take this session as dismissing the VDI solution in the enterprise. Clearly, VDI solution have a set of very interesting capabilities to use on mobile devices within enterprise. So we are not dismissing the value over there. And the second thing is we are not talking about a specific vendor implementation. Basically, the things that we are going to talk today are generic and sort of like more of the architecture aspects around the security issues there. And as I've said, we're basically going to quantify the risk, to provide demos, and provide, I think, a reasonable framework how to solve the problem. So let's start with a quick recap about mobile VDIs. And before sort of we start to understand what value VDIs are bringing, we first need to understand what enterprises are usually looking when they do bring your own device or choose your own device when they do their mobile initiatives. So the first thing is enablement. Clearly, this is the first thing that you want to do. You want to enable your users to connect to the corporate resources. You want them to consume application, and without that, basically, you don't have a mobility initiative. The second aspect is DLP or device loss. So essentially, if I lose the device, if my device is being stolen, this is usually a concern. As you all know, mobile devices, especially iPhones, are being stolen day and night. And the third aspect is intrusion, right? So basically, someone can hack the device and basically leverage the device as an endpoint or as a point to attack the enterprise. So from enablement standpoint, actually, I would say this is the greatest value about VDI, right? The fact that you install a very small client on the phone, and basically then you just tether the all enterprise applications that you already have installed. This is sort of provides an immediate value, and you actually, the enterprises are not required to customize their already existing applications, to compile them for Android, to compile them for iOS. They can use their already pre-existing infrastructure and immediately provide access. And especially this is true if the enterprise already invested in VDI solutions for their desktop infrastructure. The second aspect of device loss, DLP, device theft, this is also an area where VDI solutions have a great value, mainly because the way that VDI solutions work is when you start the session, basically you establish the tunnel, and only then the picture or the image is being transmitted to the mobile device. So basically, you don't have any persistency of the data on the device, and if you lose the device, there is no enterprise data on the device, assuming that there are no credentials or anything like that. So this is also a very important aspect. And the third aspect is clearly the aspect of intrusion. How if actually they provide protection against hacking. Now, this is clearly an area where VDI solutions do provide some marketing. And this is sort of a quote, I think, from one of the vendors' websites. And basically, they would say something around, because all of our data is in the data centers, you are secure. Clearly, this problem is not unique to mobile with VDIs. It was also exist on desktop. And with whom of you that actually looked into it, this is a bit of really good marketing. It is not really a real security claim. So actually, this will be the focus of the presentation, to sort of show you that if you're able to hack a mobile device, then you really have a problem that you need to take into consideration with VDI solutions. So before we jump into the sort of the core of the session, I would like to sort of give you a quick overview about the architecture of a VDI solution. And while this is a specific implementation of one of the vendors, overall, the architecture will be more or less, architected this way. So basically, you have a client, or in some cases, it is called a receiver, which is basically an app which is installed on your iPhone, iPad, Android device. And that app is connecting through an SSL tunnel or through a secure tunnel to a gateway, which is in the perimeter of the enterprise. That gateway is responsible for the encryption and authentication. And basically, then it communicates with a series of backend servers that they actually run the application, the enterprise applications like CRM, ERP, Word, etc. Right? And while you can find some more niche players in this market, the two big players are clearly Citrix and VMware. So now, after we sort of covered the overview and the architecture, let's start to talk about the threats. And the first threat that we want to talk about is what we call mobile remote access Trojans with key logging capabilities. Now, probably some of you have heard about mobile remote access Trojans or remote access Trojans, but before we sort of dive into the actual specifics of this threat, I would like to give you a quick overview about what is a mobile remote access Trojan and what is the actual risk of finding in the wild. So a mobile remote access Trojan is sort of a malware which is usually used for more targeted attacks. It is designed to infect usually all of the platforms, and basically once it is loaded on a device, it will try to grab email, application data, a bunch of information which is not necessarily associated with the enterprise data, like contact lists, text messages, files, photos, that kind of stuff, and also to provide a remote access to the sensors, right? Microphone, camera, and GPS. Now, if we specifically talk about the VDI, the way that they usually attack the email containers or the email applications or the general app applications like WhatsApp, Skype, all those applications, they're usually either doing it via keylogging, screen scrapping, or memory scrapping. So those are generically would be the three attacks that they would use. And sort of just to give you a high-level example, those are some of the press releases that were recently about all kind of APT campaigns that a mobile component, which is essentially an MRITE, was part of it. And while this is sort of what you see in the news, clearly one of the interesting things that we should understand about MRAT, it is not like a one category. It is actually a spectrum of different type of malware, a different type of Trojan, a different type of surveillance toolkits. And the way that we basically divide them is to three categories, right? So the first category is government-grade or military-grade mobile remote access Trojans, usually used by all kinds of intelligence agencies. In the recent Snowden leak, there was a reference of the dropout Jeep, basically an NSA implant for iOS devices, for iPhones. But NSA is not the only entity that is able to infect mobile devices. You have a couple of other commercial vendors who will sell to governments. Hacking Team and FinSpy were recently in the news. Citizen Labs did a very aggressive analysis about Hacking Team. And actually, as a good segue, yesterday FinSpy was actually hacked and 40 gigabyte of their data was exfiltrated, and now it is online. You can actually find a torrent with the source code of their mobile malware. So originally when I put this slide, I was basically saying, okay, so those are tools which are used for governments to track either terrorists or activists, and of course it's a gray area in some of the countries. But and usually those, if you look on the price list, usually they are being traded from $300,000 to $12 million. But since yesterday, it's like probably $0 to $12 million because you can just download it from GitHub. So the second, well, this category is interesting. The second category is things that we find on the darknet. AndroRat is quite an old and very famous version, but during this year we've seen a couple of others like DroidJack, Dendroid. Those tools are usually sold on kind of dodgy forums for about $300. AndroRat is free. And those are tools that are being used by cyber criminals, right, in the normal use case. And the last category, which I found the most interesting, is what we call the surveillance or monitoring tools. So this is a huge category. If you go to Google and you type spy on Android or spy on iPhone, you will see more or less like 50 results of different vendors that will provide you those capabilities. It will usually cost you around $50, or sometimes it's free, sometimes it's $100. But basically, those are tools that allow everyone to spy on everyone, okay? The normal use case is a jealous wife who is spying on her husband, or the opposite, right? And while you would think that a tool which is traded at $50 has a completely different sophistication level than a tool which is developed by a government or a nation state, the reality is actually that if you take FlexiSpy and if you take the Hacking Team Trojan, you will see that they are practically the same. At least, like, the payload, the Trojan which is dropped on the device will be more or less the same. This is a nice quote from one of the researchers in the mobile malware Google group. I don't know if he's in the audience, but I actually asked him to use this quote, and he basically did this analysis of comparing Hacking Team with other solutions. He basically said there is no difference between the Hacking Team tool and any other commercial spyware on the internet. Maybe it even has lower features, right? So, this is sort of an interesting segue to a research that we done. So, well, actually, sort of to give you another point about that, those tools are so, I would say, popular that if you search for them on the internet, you will actually get to websites that benchmark against them. So you will say, hey, I need those and those and those features, and I'm willing to pay that price, and you can actually select the best tool for you. And as you can see, MSpy is actually #1. So clearly, although this is originally a consumer problem, and last year we sort of did a very deep analysis of the effect of those things in the consumer space. We were often being asked okay, so how much is it really a problem within the enterprise space? So the good thing is that the guys, our friends in Check Point actually helped us with quantifying the risk in the enterprise space. And basically we conduct, I think, it's quite a groundbreaking research with them of understanding how many mobile devices that are connected to corporate Wi-Fi's are actually infected with those type of Trojans. So essentially it's mobile devices within corporate environments that have MRATs on them. So we analyzed the traffic of about 90 enterprises, 95 gateways, and the exercise, or the architecture is fairly simple, right? You have mobile devices, they connect to the corporate Wi-Fi. Some of those Wi-Fi, clearly they have a checkpoint gateway somewhere in the traffic path to the internet. In some of those gateways, they have some kind of opt-in solution, which is called the Checkpoint Threat Cloud. Basically, the Checkpoint Threat Cloud is something that allows Check Point to essentially, it is an anti-bot solution, and it allows them to push network signatures to their devices, and once you have a hit on a network signature, they will get statistics about it. So we took about 20 of those MRATs. We analyzed their C2 channel, okay? What is the DNS or the IP address that they're connecting to? And we gave those signatures to Check Point. Check Point ran it for several weeks on their gateway, and basically they gave us the results. So essentially, those are the rough results from that experiment. And those are the key findings. So you have 90 enterprises, right? 290 devices, okay, infected within those 90 enterprises with a targeted mobile remote access Trojans. On average, 2 infected devices per enterprise. Sorry, not on average. The median value was 2 infected devices per enterprise. 16 different families. And while, probably most of you think that iOS is completely safe. Android is where you have the most of the issues. Clearly, because those are targeted attacks, you have 10% infection rates on iOS. Out of all those MRATs that we've detected, 10% of them were on iOS. And the other thing that you can actually see here is that although I would imagine that most of the firewalls of Check Point are actually deployed within the United States, so it sort of shifts the data, but still you can see that it is not a third world problem. This is something that you see across, US, France, Brazil, Mexico. You see it worldwide, those issues. So we are actually going to publish this research with in a month. If you want access to the research, you can follow us on Twitter. We will update you guys when the report is out. Our Twitter handle is @LacoonSecurity. And without further explanation, I will give Daniel to sort of explain the real threat here.
So hello everyone. Thank you, Michael. So first, let's kind of a bit recap what we're trying to do. So we were trying to look at the 2 solutions, both VMware and Citrix, and see with them not as much as kind of vulnerabilities in VMware and Citrix, and more kind of if you would if you were to write some kind of APT, or if you would use some kind of off-the-shelf tools, what could you use to be able to, using, if you're going to do a specific targeted attack, be able to extract the information you want outside. And there are a few possible solutions, as Michael went over them earlier. Now, first of all, just say a bit about Citrix and VMware. So Citrix does provide kind of their own client and their own server. VMware kind of a bit more of a reseller, and resells it to a number of different companies. Specifically, it was kind of hard for us to try and get demo servers to work on. Citrix had their own cloud Citrix solution, which you can use to play around with. With VMware, we went for one of their resellers called Pivot 3. They also have a kind of test drive server, which you can use and play around with. But it kind of a bit limited us with the amount of configuration options that we could play around with, and what were the type of stuff that we could do and see with it. But we still were able to see some interesting things going on there. Now, VMware is a little bit more of a slim VDI. It doesn't have a lot of non-VDI capabilities hooked up onto it. Citrix does have a lot of extra stuff there. So it has like also kind of a mobile application management thing going on, and all kinds of these VPN credentials that they can download for those mobile application management, and a whole host of other, it's really a big world there, what it can do, and it's extremely complicated for what's supposed to be a pretty simple VDI solution. Most of these are pretty configurable, so you can configure all kinds of stuff about passwords, clipboards, and stuff like that. And also a lot of different clients and logging in capabilities. So they kind of want to make sure that you can log in with whatever usability you want to use, so they kind of have to, just try to keep it usually more like a username password, or username password and RSA token, or something of the sort. Now, but none of these actual clients have, from what we saw, actual real enforcement on the mobile phones. You can't actually enforce that you want the phone to have a PIN code or something of the sort. So basically, you can pretty much assume that if a user is going to have a VDI solution installed on his device, the device can basically be under whatever situation or circumstance that an employee would have such a device under. So let's say no PIN code, or unlocked, jailbroken, rooted, or whatever. Let's see. A second.
You can just click.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. So that's kind of, I think we should need to do a little bit of a disclaimer here. We do not work for MSpy, even though we do talk about them quite a bit. MSpy, again, being one of the most popular ones, does have pretty decent capabilities for doing kind of keyboard logging and all that. And again, this is completely off the shelf. No real work was needed to do with it. And kill logging really is like the 101 attack vector for coming in attacks, attacking such a solution. The first easily accessible attack was more to try to stealing credentials. This can also obviously be also used to actually steal the data being typed in inside the VDI solution. Here, I think we should try and get it to.
So, may I help you with that?
Yeah, please.
So,
can I connect?
So this should be. Second. Okay.
I can do it on mine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So, see here we have Android running one of these solutions. You'd come here, add your account, right? Put in the server name, which is Citrix Cloud.net. .net. And continue. I won't do it right now because it's like the Wi-Fi here is pretty bad. I'll show it on mine.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's connect mine for a second. This is just a.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi here is not the best.
So. No, we have our own Wi-Fi. Thank you. So, can you see it? What does it say?
No, nothing.
All right, just a second.
You need to drag it to the other desktop.
Yeah, just a second. There we go. Okay, so we'll just show it like this quickly, and we'll keep it simple. So you can see here that this is like the MSpy dashboard, and you can really see all the information that's being uploaded, whether it's location, videos, and stuff like that. And you can really see here the server name, username, password, and any other information that's being uploaded. I also tried typing earlier inside. Let's see if it was able to actually work under these circumstances. This is not working well. All right, but I think you get the idea. But generally, you can also easily get all kinds of, all the other information you want to get out of the mobile device, anything inputted inside the VDI client. Can you connect it?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. Go back to the presentation. Okay. All right. So as you can see, Charlie, easily to get all kind of stuff like username, password, and stuff like that. This is really, again, this is not that interesting an attack, but it is really off the shelf. You don't really have to do anything except just buying one of those MRATs that are available. Now, the way these, there are kind of different ways of doing these keyboard logging on Android devices specifically. Again, we're looking, for this one, we're specifically looking for Android, and we were looking at Citrix Receiver, but it would work for anybody else as well. Well, the way these MRATs usually do it is that uses some kind of repackaged keyboard. So, for example, you have a either you have just kind of a default keyboard which looks very similar to the standard Android or Samsung keyboard, and when you install it, they either set it up if you have a rooted device or something of the sort, or you have the installer set it up by changing the default keyboard to be their keyboard. But it doesn't have to be that way. It was also done on the internet of repackaging popular keyboards. A researcher did on the internet for SwiftKey in 2013, where he took SwiftKey and repackaged it such so that it would upload all user input on the keyboard into the internet to a server. So this isn't anything that's too crazy. Just kind of crack the keyboard, send it to one of the one of the employees, convince them to install it, and then you'd have a easy keylogger inside your to get all that information outside. We were trying to look at kind of other ways of doing this, which would be not as problematic. So one of the ways to do this on Android would be if you have elevated privileges, we'll try to get the bind input method permission and basically do a kind of man in the middle on the keyboard communication between what the keyboard is talking to and the input manager service. The problem was that this is a really, really complicated protocol. You kind of spend a while trying to get a POC working with this, and it was not an easy solution. The more easier solution was just to set on the input manager service. So basically, if you have elevated privileges, you can just go to the input manager service, debug it, set on one of the functions such as dispatch once, so they have a few of those, and it basically give you practically all access to all input happening on the Android device without needing to switch out the Android keyboard. Now, practically all Android ROMs do come with default visibility because the way they compile it, practically all non-static functions are exported out. So it's going to be very easy to just sit, compile, debug it, set on the function, get any information you want without actually doing anything too complicated. Surprisingly, we haven't actually seen anybody doing this kind of stuff in the wild yet. Now, the problem with all this keylogging thing is that, well, it's good for grabbing stuff being inputted inside the application. It's not necessarily very good at, if the person is already logged in, or, it's kind of messy if the person needs to, correct himself or stuff of the sort. So we're trying to look at different ways of actually grabbing the credentials if you're sitting locally on the device. So this is something we're not really going to get into too much because we don't want to, again, we don't want to try to talk too much about the specific implementations, but some of these implementations do allow the device to save the username and password locally, and they don't actually necessarily save it in the most secure way. But there are a lot of different things that you can be done in that way. But let's pretend that they're doing things properly, then like I said, keylogging has its own problems. So we basically want to just target the client and get the credentials without, assuming that the user is going to be using our keyboard to insert the credentials. So, okay. So of course, you're going to have to get privilege escalation first. So just a brief overview of what the current situation is for those who don't know. We've been having serious root vulnerabilities coming out for Android for a while now. All of these are very easily available, whether it's talroot, vroot, and that affect a wide variety of devices, and then are easily downloadable from one of the XDA threads. from the XDA form. You can just download it and either repackage it, something even have source code. Nothing too complicated, very off the shelf, very easy to use. And we have seen some of the spying software basically using some of these repackaged vulnerabilities to basically give themselves elevated privileges and things that they would not be able to do otherwise. So the first thing you want to probably do is most of these clients are written in Java or Dalvik for Android, and you want to have to enable JDWP debugging for all the apps, or at least for that app, so that you'll be able to sit and grab the credentials locally. And then you want to connect at the debugger to those VDI clients, sit on the correct function. And once you sit in the correct function, just get the information you want out of that function. So, is there a pen here? No. Okay. So, yeah, here. Okay. So, here you can see like a JD. We can't really show this demo because the Wi-Fi is going to be too messed up to actually show it. So here's a simple JDB session, but you basically be doing this as a JDWP implementation in your Android app, which is pretty simple. But basically, you need to just find the application, the correct function. So you can see this function is the get ICA file stream function. So let's just, this is specifically for Citrix. The way Citrix works is that when the client connects to the server, it basically gets a bunch of ICA files, which basically allow it to define the type of communication, the type of VDI session that it supports per file. And for each file that opens up, for each Office file that you have, or for each session that you can open, you have an ICA file. When you click it, a proper VDI session is opened up. All this is done, obviously, using credentials and so forth. So you have to find one of these files. Like, for example, for the get ICA file storage, it basically downloads one of these ICA files to be able to open up the VDI session, passing all the credentials through there. There are a number of other similar functions for down the way. Once the credentials are passed through there, you can really see very easily that you have the username and you have the password dumped through there. You can also have stuff like the two-factor authentication information being passed through there, the RSA token being passed through there. Now, this isn't anything that's too crazy or too unique, but it's just, this information, obviously the client can protect itself once the host is compromised from actually somebody being able to sit in the correct place and getting the credentials that are being passed around. So just how we saw about ways of enabling JWP debugging on the app. So one way was basically to p-trace the init process, the Zyger process, and basically change the auto debuggable property. This is similar to what setPropX does, which is a tool available on the internet and allows you to change read-only properties to enable the debugging. But a simpler solution was that you can debug the Citrix client or the VMware client and run off a Dalvik function called the JDWP startup, which basically would start up the JDWP thread, allowing you to basically connect to it with JDWP, even if the device is not in a kind of debuggable device or anything of the sort. And different possibilities of hooking apps. So like I said, we looked at JWP because that was the simplest solution. But another much simpler solution probably use something like Expose or XDA, very common toolkits for hooking apps that's being used in the wild. You just basically would do the same thing. You use their APIs to basically hook the appropriate function you'd want and get the credentials that are being passed through those functions. The way Expose works is that it basically changes the Dalvik VM to basically allow you to basically give you the full capabilities that Java would usually give you to hook API calls and use hook at all Java function calls. And basically you'd use those APIs to basically hook the functions that you would want to get access to. This would not necessarily work with Art Exposed. I don't know. I didn't see if they have a version for Art yet. But for Art, you can also use basically regular p-tracing. You don't even have to go the route of enabling the JDWP debugging because Art has its own debugging symbols, which basically allow you to see the bytecode natively. But we kind of didn't really look into it too much because it's not really out yet. So if you go back to the keyboard logging mechanism, so the easiest way again was basically you get the information that the user inputs when he's using the VDI, but you don't actually necessarily see what the user is doing. So there are kind of two different ways of being able to do screen scraping to get the information out of the VDI client. So the video solution, we did see some MRATs having video recording possibilities. So basically, you can to record only specific videos for specific apps, and that whole thing, so that you'll be able to get kind of a video session of that app being used to be able to see what's actually going on. But it kind of has a lot of problems because then you need to kind of OCR the data, or you have to just sit and watch it. It's not the easiest thing to do. So the better solution we were looking into, and if you want to do actual screen scraping, was seeing the whole clipboard support thing going on. So Citrix's default server did not have clipboard support enabled, but the Pivot 3s, which is a VMware reseller, did have the clipboard support enabled. This is obviously, like we said, these solutions are very easily configurable, and they have a lot of different configuration options. So a lot of them do have clipboard support enabled, and once you do that, you can basically get the information out by manipulating the clipboard. So if you want to use a clipboard, again, using one of those privilege escalations, though, this does not necessarily require privilege escalation. Also using shell privileges would be enough. Again, we've seen some of these MRATs, some of these spying tools, basically requiring you to run an agent in shell to give them shell capabilities. So this shell would be enough here. Monitoring the foreground activity using standard Android APIs, such as seeing what the get running task and or get foreground task, as well as to see what the current app is. And then you can also maybe take a screenshot, see when you want to do this, time it properly, and then just inject keyboard events into the Android system. So there's like a tool on Android called Input, which allows you to inject events, but it's kind of very simple. Doesn't let you do any actual serious events that we would need. So basically, so you need to kind of use those same APIs, inject input event, where we would event an event like Control-A, Control-C, because these VDIs usually run Windows. So Control-A, Control-C will copy out all the data out, maybe move a left or right to disable the selection, and nothing too complicated, pretty standard stuff. All the document gets moved into the clipboard, and then you can pull it out of the clipboard. Here you can see what a screenshot of Pivot 3's VDI solution running in the Android, and when we pull it out, you can see that just the text is just thrown out very easily. The second possibility using screen recording, like I said, we did see kind of some of those spying tools that you can buy that have these capabilities, but they're not as fully fledged. But again, you need either privilege escalation or shell privileges. Again, monitor the currently running gap to see when you want to start recording. And then you have one of the recording APIs. So you have basically two different ways of doing this. You have the new screen recorder API, which was available in 4.4, but previously you also had the frame buffer, and that would be pretty simple by itself. Now, and again, both of the API basically give you just a stream of what's happening on the screen, and both of these VDI solutions do show up in screen recording sessions. Now, what is a shame that they have this surface view that sets secure API, which was introduced in Android 4.2, which basically allows you to disable screen recording for specific surfaces on Android. And sadly, none of the VDI solutions did use this API, and this would basically require an attacker to not only have a shell privileges, but also have to actually get the root privileges to kind of bypass it or something of the sort. Now, regarding the man-in-the-middle attack.
Here's that. Second, we will connect the.
Yeah. Okay, and it was connected.
Yeah, you need to tether it.
For the airplane. Yeah. Okay, so.
Okay.
Okay. Going first into.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So let's first just go over kind of how usually these communications work. So you have a VDI client running on some kind of mobile device. The VDI client uses over SSH, SSL, Over SSL, it sends the user credentials. The server tells the client that it's authorized. Then the server tells the client the different services and policies that like kind of VPN stuff. Like we said, this is more for Citrix, has like VPN, all these added applications. And then the client would request which service it wants, and then you'd have a fully fledged two-way pipe for VDI communications, basically having all the information passing through. So iOS has a support for what's called iOS configuration profiles. This was discussed by researchers about a year ago. This configuration profiles have a lot of very easy capabilities to configure iOS with a lot of interesting features, a lot of configuration that like users really need, like being able to set up kind of proxies or VPNs and installing certificate authorities without the user actually really seeing that he's installing a certificate authority. These stuff are really helpful for being able to
That's good.
This stuff is really helpful for actually being able to easily set up man-in-the-middle attacks. This is not working. Okay. Yeah. So, like we said, this is a very easy way of setting up a man-in-the-middle attack with SSL man-in-the-middle, because since you're installing a root CA, you can basically unwind and open up all SSL communication. So
let's do the demo for the sake of time.
Yeah, okay. So we don't have a lot of time. We can show you the demo quickly. I think I'm going to run ahead.
So let's see. Should have that.
So we basically have a I'll continue explaining. Well, we basically have a man-in-the-middle server. There's a client called Python project called MITM server, which basically allows you to set up an SSL man-in-the-middle server, and we kind of used it and changed it to basically be able to look at the credentials being passed over in the initial logging thread. So VMware kind of just passes the username and password in clear text. Citrix does hide the Citrix username and password using a very complicated running SOAR algorithm. So that's very difficult to bypass using 5 lines of Python code. Okay, I think we don't have time for this.
No, that's it.
Okay, so let's connect to the server. So you have basically a server. The server generates a certificate malicious configuration profile, which would look like this. Here, open the. No, it needs to be 7. Here, you can see, can't they see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, you'd open up the malicious configuration profile, let's say using some kind of QR code or a link in an email. Once the user opens the link, he has the configuration profile installation screen.
Not necessarily you need to write.
Yeah, you don't have to write man-in-the-middle attack profile. That's up to you. Once you have it installed, that's it. Now you have a fully working man-in-the-middle attack. And if we open up for example, this thing, you could see here, username and passwords. No, it's not connecting for some reason. Okay. No. Yeah, I don't know. So,
okay, so essentially.
Okay, so we can show it. We'll try and show it later. Just kind of short on time here. Yeah, but you can see here that basically you can get it out very easily by opening the running SOA. Here. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So basically, what happens is once the configuration profile is installed on the device, all the SSL tunnel is being compromised, and essentially you can both hijack the credentials which you can see here. Unfortunately, with the Wi-Fi setup here, we were not able to show you that live, but you saw how easy it is to install the configuration profile. And essentially, if you already want to do something which is more sophisticated, you can essentially hijack all the communication and both sort of grab the tethering of the images if you're able to sort of decrypt one of those, not decrypt, but basically analyze the protocols.
Sadly, the protocols are closed source and they're not really analyzed yet. We were looking into kind of opening them up, but it was a bit too much work for a simple, quick solution.
Yeah, but some of the protocols are like RDP. So quickly, we will sort of recap about the things that we showed and discussed with you guys today. And the first thing is, as you can see, basically the integrity of the VDI is essentially relies on the integrity of the device itself, right? So even if the device is infected with a Trojan, if the device is compromised with a configuration profile, then the session can be compromised, deliberately or undeliberately, by the way. And basically one of the things that you should sort of look at to be able to build, to allowing a more robust architecture around VDIs is to have a more of a defense-in-depth approach on the endpoint. So basically, you do need to assess, you need to deliver some kind of capability to assess different levels of the attacks on the device. So essentially, on the application level, like the MRATs, on the configuration level, like the configuration profile, and on the network level. And essentially, you want to have a more robust and sophisticated detection than just signature-based. And then you need to tie the result of your assessment back to the VDI. So essentially, one of the ways that you can do it is basically by generating this real-time score for the device. Once the device connects, once the device tries to establish the tunnel, that risk score can be fed back to the VDI and essentially either not to allow the session to open up at all, or basically to terminate the tunnel if the device is compromised during the session. So clearly you also need to have some remediation capabilities on the device to allow users to basically to remediate the device and reconnect to the session. But this is sort of the overall framework, and you can check out more on our website about about the more strategic aspects around that. I would also like to thank the guys from both from my team, from Lacoon, and also from Checkpoint for collaborating on the research around the MRATs and the effect of them in the enterprise environments. And that's basically it. So if you guys have questions, you can contact us.